It's 2019. Why am I now looking at a speaker from 2017? Well, it's a Sony XB30. People have been telling me for 2 years, oh, you like the JBL Charge 3 so much, why don't you listen to the XB30? Because if you play around with the EQ settings, it sounds better than the Charge 3. And I looked into it, I had a listen. I thought even if it's going to be a little better at certain volumes, it wasn't enough for me to justify buying two of them because I've got two JBL Charge 3s. I do like playing them in stereo, and I'd have to buy two of them. And is there enough of a difference, even if there is a difference, to justify that? Well, I see now the XB32 is about to come out in May. I'm thinking, well, I guess I'd give that one a go. And if I'm going to give that one a go, I'd like to see if there is much of a difference between that and the XB30, because people say, well, the XB30 is still better than the XB31. So I thought, you know what? I think maybe it's time to get a bit of a handle on it, because I can buy this basically, quite cheap off eBay. I got this one secondhand, £60. What I didn't know was it's got the cover missing from the USB. So when I got it, I thought, oh, that's all right. I didn't realize there was actually ever a cover on that till I looked at some videos again. I'd already put a 5-star feedback. I'm kind of gutted that I did that. But anyway, the XB30. So this video is not a review. It's basically me trying to get a handle for my own personal gratification. What is the XB30 all about? Especially if I'm going to listen to the XB32, I want to know what the real differences are. So yeah. Obviously, I'm going to compare it to the JBL Charge 3, the JBL Charge 4, because they are clearly the contemporaries. They are the closest rivals in terms of weight and size. In terms of weight, 980 grams, the XB30, 965 grams, Charge 4, 800 grams, so a little bit lighter than the other two, the Charge 3. I quite like the form factor. It is a hard plastic, but I quite like it. I've got to point out, it's IPX5, so it's only basically splash proof, but it's not a deal breaker to me. It's not something I do on a regular basis, drop them in the swimming pool and go listening to them. It also means it's not completely dust proof, but it shouldn't let in little bits of dust, but not completely dust proof. Rated at 30 watts, Charge 4 rated at 30 watts, Charge 3 rated at 20 watts, although it doesn't mean a hell of a lot in the real world. Seems to be great on battery power, rated officially 24 hours, I believe, at 75% volume, and I'm seeing people claiming 18 hours at maximum volume. But with the LEDs off, of course, Sony gives you the LEDs, which you can control using the app. Don't get those with JBL. In fact, you don't even get two drivers with JBL anymore, and that's another reason I want to get a hand on the Sony speakers, because it seems JBL going all out mono speakers. Quite amazing, really, and Sony are still, a bit old-fashioned. They're giving us stereo. So I thought, maybe if the new ones are a little bit better than the JBLs, it's worth switching over to Sony's. Sony's, of course, have a party mode where you can hook up multiple speakers just like JBL. But stereo is a lot easier because you've got physical buttons to add a second speaker in stereo, whereas it's a nightmare using the app each time you want to use stereo with the JBLs. Another reason why I'm looking at the Sony's. You also, of course, get the extra bass button. So what exactly does the extra bass button do? Well, it appears that it just turns on the Clearaudio Plus feature, which is an auto EQ from Sony. So it's basically taking a stab at what it thinks will liven up any particular track. So in theory, plays each track a little bit differently, but in reality, it seems to basically do the same sort of thing, give you a bit of a V shape, a more exciting shape, seems to fill out the sound, more dynamic. Not necessarily more accurate, but more party pleasing. But it seems to do the same things more or less on each track, from what I've seen, from what I've tested. But yeah, it does give you a quick, oh, that sounds better sound until unless you go into it and you start delving into the real differences between the sound. But it's one of those things where you do a quick A/B and say, oh, that's definitely better. But an hour later, you might be thinking, oh, that's not quite right, is it? So first thing I wanted to see was extra bass. Without extra bass, they call that the flat profile. If you go into the app, you've either got extra bass or you've got flat. So this is a comparison, different volume levels. Flat versus extra bass. playing without extra bass, the flat EQ, 20% volume, extra bass, 20% volume. So the extra bass is pushing the upper bass, the 100 to 200 hertz, and it's pushing it at the expense of the lower mids, 300 to 1000 hertz. So at the lower volumes, flat EQ, no extra bass is the more accurate profile. But if you want really heavy bass at the expense of a lot of clarity at the lower volumes, you're going to prefer the extra bass. But the extra bass doesn't show itself to advantage until you start going up the volume scales. So flat 46%, Clearaudio extra bass 46%. So you can see again, it's upper bass, lower mids, where you get the difference between the two profiles. Flat, extra bass, flat, extra bass. From 40% as you go up, extra bass really becomes the more accurate profile. The so-called flat profile. The so-called flat profile is pushing the mids over the rest of the profile. And of course you do get a bit more bass slam with the extra bass. 46% flat, extra bass. This is like another decibel of bass at these volumes. 75% flat, extra bass. You can see it's consistent. Clearaudio extra bass pushes upper bass and the flat profile pushes the lower mids. But that extra bass really does start pushing some body that you miss with that flat profile. When you hit the top volumes, 100% extra bass, there's a huge difference in the bass. It's not just a bigger bass at the high volume, it goes louder altogether by a couple of decibels. Flat, got 25.2 bass peak. Extra bass, 23.5, so near 2 decibels more bass. That's a lot. What I got from that was I would personally use flat up to about 40%, and then I'm going to switch on extra bass after that. It's not a huge deal because you can turn it on not just from the speaker, you can also use it in the app. So either way, it's not a long-winded process to get into and turn it on and off. It's also noticeable how flat and extra bass differ in terms of one is more mids focused and the other's obviously more of a V-shaped, as in extra bass. So the other thing was, well, you've got extra bass, but you've also got your own custom settings. You can adjust bass, treble, and the mids using the app. So then I'm thinking, well, extra bass, or you can still go +10, -10 bass in the app. So I wanted to just get a bit of a handle on what those app settings were doing, you know, when you've already got this extra bass on or off. And just to exaggerate the differences, I'm trying each one at +10 bass, +10 mids, +10 treble. Extra bass button on, no EQ. Extra bass button on, using the app, EQ bass +10. So it's starting from about 40 to 50 hertz, +3 decibels, and then rolling off to about just over 300 hertz. After which there's almost, well, there is no difference. So straightforward, 40 to about 300 hertz is getting boosted, but there's a strong roll off from 40 hertz onwards. It's where it's +3 decibels. It's rolled off all the way to 300 hertz. Flat profile, no EQ. Flat profile, EQ, bass +10. This time it's doing the same thing from about 40 to 50 hertz, +3 decibels, but this time it's rolling off to about 150 hertz. So it's not quite affecting the bass as it did in the extra bass profile. So it seems EQ, bass +10, has more effect when you've already hit the extra bass button.
This ain't the
flat, no EQ, treble boosted. So as you'd expect, 4,000 hertz up, it's a strong boost. The higher you go, the stronger the boost. But it is affecting the mids. If you look at the mids, there's little peaks that are some a little bit boosted, some a little bit reduced. Look at the mids around here, these peaks. There's an effect in the mids, which is a bit hard to work out because some parts are boosted, some parts are reduced, as well as this high-end treble boost. So if you're adding treble because you want the extra clarity, some of the clarity is affected because some of the mids are reduced. That's why I think it really becomes quite unpleasant to boost the treble as you go up the volume on the XB30. Extra bass, no EQ, treble plus 10. So yeah, you're getting a big boost in the treble all the way into harsh and sibilant areas. But look at the mids around here. Some of it's getting reduced. Some bits are boosted. So only a little bit, but it is affecting the mids. And mids is where you get a lot of the clarity. It's where, especially in extra bass, you're missing some of that original track. It's more of a V shape when you go to extra bass. So it's not a straightforward treble boost. Extra bass, no EQ, extra bass mids plus 10 at 46% volume. So you'd be expecting mids to affect, what, around 250 hertz to about 4,000 hertz. Actually, it seems to affect the whole track, except for the bass below 100 hertz. So you can see everything's boosted from 100 hertz right up to the very high end. But with a peak around 800 to about 2,500 hertz. So the peak around here, but still boosting everything from 100 hertz onwards. It's a dramatic difference to the sound. Same thing, no extra bass, no EQ, plus 10 mids. It's exactly the same. 100 hertz onwards, everything is boosted with the main peak 800 to about 2,500 hertz. So huge difference to the sound. And actually, if you look at all the different combinations combined, the original down here, what looks the most accurate? It's the ones with the mids pushed. So extra bass mids pushed here, flat profile mids pushed here. So in other words, no extra bass here with mids pushed, extra bass mids pushed. They're the two most resemble the original track, followed by the flat profiles. The extra bass profiles just lacking in the mids compared to the original. So at this point, I've pretty much got, you know, for my own benefit, I think I've got a handle on how to use my speaker, when it's going to sound better and with what settings. I want to now get a handle on where it sits between the Charge 3 and the Charge 4. Obviously the Charge 4 being the newest version of all three speakers. I already know at lower volumes I'm going to use it flat, higher volumes I'm going to be switching to extra bass. So I've done a comparison at 33% using flat and at 66% using extra bass against the Charge 3 and the Charge 4.
I'm on my own, broken and alone. I feel the rain crashing down all around this empty town. I'm searching for the lost and found, but you don't care, you're unaware. Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare. Don't stare 'cause the flames will burn us. I thought you were the one for me, that's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me.
Sony XB30 flat, Sony XB30 with a little bit of EQ, something that works for me personally. No matter what the volume, just a little bit of EQ adds nearly a decibel, even at 33% volume, to the bass peak at around 56, 57 hertz. A little bit of EQ gives you a little bit more body, a little bit more clarity. The Charge 3 doesn't do that well, 33% volume. Can't match the bass at all, or the amount of body to the sound that you get on the Sony. And the bass peak, much higher, 73 hertz. It's 16 hertz higher, and even then, 6 decibels down. On the Sony, the Charge 4, it can nearly match the bass peak in terms of sheer decibels, but it's 68 hertz, it's 10 hertz higher than on the Sony. The Sony's going deeper and louder in the bass, and I think the Sony's more accurate. The original down here, bottom right, and I can see the closest to that really is the Sony with a little bit of EQ, and followed closely by the Sony flat with no EQ. I think they're both more accurate than the Charge 3 and the Charge 4. If you look at the Sony with the EQ and then go to the original, it's pretty close. Look at the difference if I go to the Charge 4. You really see the difference there. So certainly the Sony does really well at the lower volumes.
Everybody gives you advice, yeah, on how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, better realize. Nobody knows what's in your soul and how your heart works. Nobody knows, nobody cares. It's time for you to live your life, yeah. You can do it right now. Oh, you can do it right now. You can do it right now, yeah. You can do it right now. You can do it right now.
So extra bass rather than the flat profile, because the flat profile is just, for me, too anemic as you go over 50% volume. extra bass on, and a little bit of EQ. But it doesn't make as much difference as it did with a flat profile, 33% volume, where it pushed most of the sound, including the upper bass. Now, it doesn't really have so much effect. The same EQ, really, just pushing the high end, around 12,000 hertz. It's getting pushed. Whereas the rest of the change is quite subtle, really. Again, bass peak 66 hertz, 20.7, 66, 20. So 0.7 decibels, a little bit of EQ puts on the bass. And a little bit more high end. Charge 3. Well, you can really see the nature of the Charge 3 there. It's mids focused. The bass, alright, it can match the bass at 67 hertz. 66 again on Sony, but 24.3, it's over 4 decibels down, and it's, you can see, a mid-focused sound now, which you may or may not like, but it does set the Charge 3 apart in that sense. The Charge 4, you can see it doesn't have that mid-focused sound, but the bass 20.9, 24.3, 3.5 decibels louder than the Charge 3, but still does not match the Sony. So it nearly matches the extra bass profile, but not quite. And it doesn't have the accuracy of the Sony. It's a Sony extra bass EQ. That's the original. That's the Charge 4. You can see who's closer. It's the Sony. Now I will say, Sony is one of those speakers that is tuned to do well in an AB. And by that I mean certain things hit you immediately and more subtle things hit you as you have an extended listen. So when you're doing an A-B comparison, things like more obvious bass, deeper bass, more thumpy bass, a boosted treble, you know, for extra clarity, more forward vocals. When you're doing an A-B, they give that speaker an advantage, but becomes wearing when you have a long-term listen and you go over tracks you've heard before and suddenly they sound a little bit different and not quite right. I will say, the Sony I think is flattered by these comparisons. I will say, I do think I prefer it now over Charge 4, Charge 3, but it is fiddly. You do have to keep playing with those settings, which changes depending on the volume. And those settings, I mean, I will always use extra bass at higher volumes, but the custom app settings keeps changing. For instance, you know, at lower settings, yes, I do need to boost the treble, boost some of those mids. But as you get to higher volumes, boosting the same thing suddenly becomes a bit harsh and a bit horrible. You know, the treble is a bit tinny, a bit off, a bit unpleasant as you start going up to the higher volumes. I do prefer the Charge 3 in that sense, but it's definitely more meaty, more bass, deeper bass. So I do like that, but I would say the mids on it do not sound as nice as they do on the Charge 3. I know you can boost them, but it's kind of hard edged, and whereas mids to me are normally the lush, sweet part of the music, I don't get that from the Sony. It's a bit hard edged, and the treble, as I said, is, I mean, neither of the Charge 3 or the 4 are known for their treble. The Charge 4 pretty rolled off, the Charge 3, you know, lacking in treble. But this is actually unpleasant, I think. And I haven't, so I'm saying that, but I'm kind of edging towards the Sony for my long-term listening at the moment. Probably get a second one to have a go in stereo. I'm just pointing out, I'm not saying, oh, this beats the Charge 3 after, you know, loving on the Charge 3 for two odd years or more. I'm not quite sure now, I can't remember when it came out. I'm just saying you can tweak it a lot more. Whereas the Charge 3, you just put it on, it sounds all right. I don't have to keep worrying about, oh, I want to change, oh, I'm low volume, I'm going to change that, I'm going to change that. I'm at maximum volume, oh, that's not, I'm going to... Well, you do that with the Sony, or I find myself, and I hear other people saying the same things, you have to keep switching those settings with the Sony. So that in itself may be a deal breaker. But if you take the time to set it up for whatever volume you are listening to, and with the caveats that, you know, not all the boosting that you can do is for the best, probably I'm starting to listen to this more than Charge 3. Mostly, I guess, because it's just a fuller, thicker sound, which is, you know, it's more in your face, it's more pleasing when when you're only going to have a listen for about 30 minutes. I don't know, if I was doing a 2 or 3 hour listen, would I still go that way? I don't know, but that's my handle. The only question was, what's the difference in loudness? You know, these are both 30 watts, that's 20 watts. Surely the Charge 4 is going to have something going for it other than that 70 hertz massive bass boost. How does it hold up at the maximum volumes? my comparison. JBL Charge 4, the newest speaker of these three. Bringing up the rear, it's the quietest, both in peak and average. Now the peak is in the bass. The JBL Charge 3, it can't match the JBL Charge 4 at maximum volume for bass. It's like 3.5 decibels quieter, but because it's so strong in the mids, its mids peak is stronger than the peak on the bass of the Charge 4. And overall, it is louder by a decibel. Sony XB30, again an older speaker, rated 30 watts, the same as the Charge 4, but the Sony, even in flat profile, around 2 decibels louder in both the peak and overall average sound. And that bass goes down to 58 Hertz, where it's 73, 74 on the JBLs, down to 58 in flat profile on the Sony, albeit it's not quite as loud as the bass peak on the Charge 4, but it's deeper. A little bit of EQ, stick the bass up as high as it can go. +5 on the mids, another decibel on your peak, another decibel average louder overall. And that bass now at 58 Hertz is louder at -25 than the Charge 4 at 73 Hertz. Extra bass profile, louder still in terms of peak and average sound, but don't forget the peak is in the mids. Extra bass with no EQ is only 0.5 decibel quieter in the bass peak at 59 Hertz than the flat profile with +10 bass, which is -25. And a bit more EQ, +10, +5 in the mids, louder still. So extra bass with bass at +10, mids +5. I mean, you can stick the mids and the treble up even higher if you wanted. Peak difference 6.1 decibels, albeit the Charge 4 is a bass peak and the Sony is the peak is in the mids, but 6.1 decibels difference. Overall average 4.5 decibels difference, 21.4, 25.9. So if you're talking purely about how loud does it go, how much bass has it got, Sony extra bass plus EQ is the winner of these three. They are similar speakers. So yeah, even when you go to maximum, the Sony, to me, you know, it's a clear winner. If it's all about how loud does it go and does it still retain some bass, then it's a no-brain winner for the XB30. For me, personally, I'm not saying everyone's going to agree with what I'm saying. So that's my handle on it. And this is not a review. This was just me giving my thoughts, a preamble to when I get the XB32 when it comes out. So I do hope you got something out of this video, and thank you for watching. UK